In a quiet little town lived a kind young dressmaker named Clara. Her little shop sat at the end of a quiet cobblestone street, but everyone agreed no one stitched more beautifully than she did. Then, one morning, a grand carriage stopped outside her tiny shop. The mayor's wife stepped out. Every year, on her birthday, she wore a dress unlike any the village had ever seen. This year, she had chosen Clara. In 7 days, she said, "I want a dress unlike anything anyone has ever worn." Clara looked around her little workshop. One old sewing table, a few rolls of fabric, a single candle. She took a deep breath and smiled. "I promise." As the carriage disappeared down the road, Clara quietly closed her shop door, looked at the empty room, and whispered, "Now, where do I even begin?" She didn't notice 3 tiny pairs of eyes, quietly watching from beneath the floorboards. The moment the mayor's wife left, Clara hurried to her sewing table. She sketched one dress, then another, flowing sleeves, elegant collars, beautiful embroidery, but every design looked ordinary. By sunset, her workshop floor was covered with crumpled sketches. Clara sighed. "I promised something the world has never seen," she whispered. "But I can't even surprise myself." As night settled over the village, she prepared a simple supper: fresh bread, warm vegetable soup, a shiny red apple. Before going inside, she placed the basket on her windowsill. She had done this every evening for years. No matter how little she had, she always saved one meal for someone else. "Perhaps someone is hungrier than I am," she smiled. Then she blew out the candle and quietly went to bed. Moonlight drifted through the trees. Tiny boots rustled across the forest floor. 3 little dwarfs appeared from the shadows. Patch's eyes sparkled. "Apple pie," Pidgeot grinned. "And warm soup." Barnaby unfolded the tiny note. "If you're hungry, please enjoy." He smiled gently. She never asks who takes it. The 3 dwarfs shared the meal beneath the stars. When they had finished, Barnaby looked toward Clara's workshop. An unfinished dress rested quietly beneath the moonlight. Scattered sketches covered the floor. Clara had fallen asleep at her sewing table. Barnaby adjusted his spectacles. "I believe," he whispered, "it's time we stitched a little kindness back." The 3 dwarfs quietly climbed through the open window. Barnaby gently unfolded Clara's sketches. He studied each one carefully. "The stitching is lovely," he whispered, "but every unforgettable dress tells a story." Patch wandered around the workshop, curiously examining ribbons, buttons, and colorful scraps of fabric. Then he suddenly stopped. A tiny wildflower had bloomed through a crack beneath the windowsill. Its soft blue petals glowed in the moonlight. "Look," Patch whispered, "even the smallest flower has its own story." Fidget smiled. With a needle no bigger than a pine needle, he carefully stitched a single winding vine along the edge of Clara's sleeve. Tiny woodland flowers bloomed across the thread. Barnaby gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Only one little vine," he said. "The masterpiece must belong to Clara." Before the first rays of sunlight touched the village, the 3 dwarfs quietly slipped back into morning, Clara reached for the unfinished dress. She froze. A delicate vine of tiny woodland flowers danced across the sleeve. She traced the tiny stitches with her fingertips. "I don't remember sewing this." Then her eyes drifted to the little wildflower resting beside her sketch. A smile slowly spread across her face. "The forest," she whispered. "That's the story I've been searching for." She grabbed her pencil, and for the first time, the impossible dress finally began to take shape. The days slipped by faster than Clara had hoped. Each morning, she wandered through the quiet forest, admiring graceful fern leaves, tiny bluebirds, wildflowers swaying in the breeze, and silver dewdrops sparkling beneath the rising sun. Every evening, she returned to her workshop with fresh ideas, and every night, the three little dwarfs quietly visited. Patch left a delicate feather beside her sketches. Fidget stitched a tiny butterfly near the hem. Barnaby carefully adjusted a pattern, then gently whispered, only enough to inspire. Little by little, the dress began to bloom. Woodland flowers climbed across the sleeves. Bluebirds nestled among curling vines. Tiny silver stars shimmered beneath the folds of the skirt. Yet as the 6th evening arrived, Clara stepped back and sighed. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "but is it unforgettable?" Just then, a soft breeze drifted through the open window. One tiny wildflower floated onto the unfinished dress. Clara smiled. She picked up her needle and stitched the flower exactly where it had landed. Suddenly, everything felt complete. The dress was no longer inspired by the forest. It had become part of the forest itself. With only one day remaining, Clara looked at her creation, and for the first time, she truly believed she could keep her promise. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She quietly blew out her candle and hid behind a curtain beside her sewing table. The workshop fell completely silent. Then, creak. One loose floorboard slowly lifted. 3 tiny dwarfs climbed into the room. Barnaby carried his little sewing kit. Fidget balanced a spool of golden thread. Patch held a tiny blue wildflower. Just as Barnaby reached for the dress, Clara stepped out with a gentle smile. The 3 dwarfs froze. Patch quickly hid behind Barnaby's coat. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then Patch peeked around the coat and blurted, "I'm sorry. We only borrowed your bread." Barnaby smiled and gently patted his shoulder. Clara couldn't help but laugh. "So it really was you?" Barnaby nodded. "We hoped you wouldn't mind." Clara knelt beside them. "I never left the food for thanks," she said softly. "I only hoped someone wouldn't go to bed hungry." The 3 dwarfs looked at one another. Then Barnaby quietly replied, "Our grandmother always told us, when kindness is given freely, stitch a little kindness back." Clara's eyes filled with warmth. She broke the fresh loaf on her table into 4 pieces. That night, they shared their very first meal together. And somewhere between warm bread and quiet laughter, 4 strangers became friends. That evening, Clara lit every candle in her little workshop. For the first time, she wasn't sewing alone. Barnaby carefully measured the final pieces of fabric. Fidget's tiny needle danced through colorful thread, stitching delicate butterflies and curling vines. Patch happily arranged fresh wildflowers and fern leaves across the table. More inspiration, he grinned. Together, they stitched late into the night. Between every laugh, every story, and every careful stitch, the dress slowly came to life. It wasn't decorated with jewels or gold. Instead, it carried the beauty of the forest. As the first rays of sunrise slipped through the window, Clara carefully stitched the very last flower onto the sleeve. She lowered her needle. The room fell silent. The four friends stepped back together. The dress shimmered softly in the morning light. Barnaby smiled. "It was always your masterpiece, Clara." She looked at her three little friends and shook her head with a smile. "No," she whispered. "It became our story." The next evening, the village gathered for the mayor's wife's birthday celebration. When she stepped into the garden wearing Clara's dress, the cheerful chatter faded into silence. Woodland flowers climbed gracefully across the sleeves. Bluebirds rested among curling vines. Tiny silver stars shimmered beneath the flowing skirt. The dress looked as though the forest itself had been stitched into every thread. The mayor's wife slowly twirled. A joyful smile filled her face. "It feels," she whispered, "like spring." She turned to Clara. "I asked for a dress unlike anything anyone had ever worn." Clara smiled warmly. "And every stitch tells a story." The mayor's wife hugged Clara. "It is the most beautiful gift I've ever received." As everyone celebrated, Clara quietly glanced toward the edge of the forest. 3 tiny dwarfs smiled proudly beneath the trees. She placed a hand over her heart. The 3 little friends waved, then disappeared among the wildflowers. That evening, Clara placed another basket of warm bread on her windowsill. The next morning, the basket was empty. Beside it rested 3 tiny wooden flowers, carefully carved by hand. From that day on, the little basket never left Clara's windowsill, because kindness, like the finest stitch, always finds its way home.